This is just as important as the music and everything else we do here, so please do give them your attention. Let me introduce you to Sterlin.
How is everybody doing this evening in Houston for the community? All right, give me a little opportunity to move around here. The moment you have this extraordinary feeling in your heart called love, and you feel the delight, the depth, and the ecstasy of it, you will then discover that in you, the world has been transformed. This is a famous quote by a psychological spiritualist by the name of Jiddu Krishnamurti. Anybody heard of Krishnamurti before? Awesome. So this quote is representative of how I felt the very first time that I did MDMA. Who's familiar with MDMA here? Yeah, absolutely. MDMA. Thank you. Absolutely. Okay. Make sure I'm getting going here good. So, a little backstory. Before I had my first experience on MDMA, I was not a thinking person. I was not a person who really cared about myself. I didn't love myself. I didn't love other people. I kind of fell into what psychologist Charles Tart referred to as consensus delusion. I was sort of living in this zombified state where I was shambling through life, and I was wondering what the hell brains were, right? And then a good friend of mine invited me over to his house, and he said, I have something that I want you to try, Sterlin. I have something I want you to try. And he opened up his hand, and he had a little red pill in his hand, and it was a very Matrix-esque moment where I was going to be Neo coming out of the Matrix. I took the pill, and he said it was MDMA, and you're going to feel the best you've ever felt in your life. Well, what he told me was actually an understatement. As I started to come up on MDMA, I started touching myself much like that, and I started touching everybody in the room, and I was totally just enamored of life at that point. And then as I started to peak on the compound, I had what the Buddhists refer to as a state of satori, where I had this experience of enlightenment. It's also been referred to as a peak experience by some psychologists, but I told myself over and over again, I'm a lot smarter than I ever thought I was. I'm a lot smarter than I ever thought I was. I'm a lot smarter than I ever thought I was. And at that moment, I had a total transformation of personality, what the psychologists refer to as a quantum personality shift. I was changed at that moment, and I decided, wow, since I have been told my whole life that I'm not intelligent, that I'm not going to do anything with my life, and that I was only in remedial classes in high school, and I did shitty in high school. But at that moment, it was all different. I decided I wanted to go back to school. I wanted to get my bachelor's degree in psychology because I was suddenly in love with the field and school of psychology. I was curious about the brain and the mind and how these things function. So that became very important for me. I did go back to school. I got my bachelor's degree in psychology. I went and started working, and now working on my master's degree. So it was an absolutely amazing experience. But here's what happened. And I think a lot of you guys probably know how the story goes. I was so excited about MDMA because of my personal experience that I thought, fuck, I'm going to start giving this to all of my friends. If I can go through this experience and wake up and come to terms with who I am and come to terms with other people, then I will be able to help other people through this process. So that's what I did. I started handing MDMA out to everybody in my circles. I started giving it to them. I started waking people up. And it was. Absolutely. We'll see now. Okay. And as I was doing this, I got so excited about it. One of my really dear friends, he's still a close friend of mine, he ended up getting in a lot of trouble. But he came over to my house, and I let him hold 500 pills of MDMA at my house, about 26 grams of cocaine, and in a smorgasbord, kaleidoscopic array of multicolored pills and powders at my house. And what he did, he would come in and out and leave. I told him he could come and go as he pleases and do whatever the hell he wanted to. And eventually, he sold to an undercover narcotics agent. And boo! Boo! He sold to an undercover narcotics agent, and being the asshole that this undercover narcotics agent obviously is, went and got a warrant to raid my apartment at the time. And so the very next day after he sold, I heard a knock on my door, and before I really knew what was happening, I opened the door, I was thrown to the ground, and I blacked out momentarily. And when I came to, there was about 15 people in my house saying, "This is a police raid, this is a raid, and you are under arrest." And they were decked out in full battle regalia. They had their machine guns, and it was just me and one other person in the house, and we were unarmed, so we could not defend ourselves against this attack on our life and livelihood. Anyway, I was charged with possession, with intent to deliver of a controlled substance, and intent to manufacture a controlled substance of more than 500 grams of both MDMA and cocaine and a slew of other compounds. So as a result of this, luckily, I was able to hire the smarmiest, greasiest attorney that I could find, and he was able to wrangle a deal for me to get deferred adjudication probation, which technically in Texas means that there's no conviction on your record when you complete the terms of your probation. So I finished, everyone can hear me okay, right? Okay. So I finished my probationary period after 5 years. I finished my probationary period after 5 years because I wrote the judge a letter saying that I was a good kid and that I should be able to get off of probation. And so they let me off. I was able to get off of probation and finish that. I played by their game, played by their rules, and all that was golden. So here's what happened as a result of getting off of probation and experiencing the MDMA. I started thinking, man, this compound was super awesome. So what I really want to talk about right now is, if you guys are interested in MDMA and haven't heard about it before, I want to provide a little bit of information on what it does to you and how it works, and what it did for me as far as developing a certain philosophy and certain community that I've been working on. Pharmacologically, neurologically, what MDMA does is it causes a mass serotonin dump in the brain. Anybody here familiar with what serotonin is? Okay, so I hope everybody's familiar with it. You're all on serotonin right now. So serotonin, once it's dumped by MDMA at a massive level, all of it at pretty much at one time, it also acts as a neuromodulator and causes the brain to release a neurohormone called oxytocin. Oxytocin has been called the molecule of love. It's the type of molecule that is released whenever we connect with people, whenever we get close to people. Oxytocin naturally releases. But even more interesting than that, serotonin also modulates the release of a neurocompound referred to as prolactin. Prolactin is the compound that our brain releases in the post-orgasmic state. So right after coitus, that feeling that you have right after sex is the same feeling that we experience on MDMA as we start to peak on the compound. As far as the subjective effects are concerned that tie into the pharmacology, MDMA has been called an empathogenic substance. That means that it allows us to connect with people, to be empathetic, to experience their suffering, to be one with those individuals for a time. And if we do it with people that we love, people who we're close to, it allows us to dissolve boundaries so we can communicate any kind of repressed feelings that we have, so that we can make a deep contact with those people and resolve our disputes. So as I was starting to think about how MDMA functions on this level, I was thinking, we already have the necessary neurological equipment to do this on a regular basis, to create communities that are geared around what we already have in us without ever actually doing MDMA. Don't get me wrong, MDMA is a very useful tool for waking people up, but we've got to move beyond that. We've got to expand ourselves. We've got to expand our consciousness in order to build the communities that we want to build. And what I did... So I started developing this philosophy that I just referred to as relational anarchism. Anybody familiar with anarchism in general as a concept? Okay, cool. For anybody who is unfamiliar with anarchism, it's just a philosophy that means without rulers. It means we don't want tyrants in our lives. We don't want jackbooted thugs trying to tell us how to live our lives. And we want to be able to expand our consciousness, accept cognitive liberty, and live as freely as fucking possible. We don't need these people in our lives telling us how to live and what to do. Down with the king. Down with the fucking king. And so, as I started to think about this philosophy, I thought, well, anarchism is good and all, but I noticed that a lot of anarchists tend to be hard anarchists. They tend to try to beat people over the head with logic, economics, and morality. They tend to focus strictly on that. But I started to notice that what if we just leverage our compassion? What if we leverage our love for one another and we make connections with people so that we can build a community of anarchists without ever even having to touch that, or to at least start talking about logic, morality, and economics after the fact. I actually developed this concept in relational anarchism, just referred to, I call it the relationalist ethic. And all that means is if we're making a connection with people, if we're attempting to talk to people, if we care about people, we're already engaging in nonviolent interactions. And Derrick also has talked about a lot of this stuff as well in his idea of holistic anarchism. So there's a bunch of overlap in regards to that. But it's an amazing philosophy. And one little thing I'm going to talk about, and hopefully we'll have a little time for questions, is how do we do this on a practical level? How does this work on a practical level? Well, we already have a tool in our tool belt. Who here is familiar with Marshall Rosenberg? Okay, a couple of people. Marshall Rosenberg was a psychologist and thinker who in the 60s developed a communication skill called nonviolent communication. Now, a little backstory. Marshall Rosenberg was a pupil, disciple, and fan of the great psychologist by the name of Carl Rogers. Carl Rogers was responsible for creating the second wave of counseling psychology, which is referred to as the humanistic school of psychology, the humanistic movement. And this idea of nonviolent communication basically states that if we recognize that other people have needs, and if we try to meet those needs, and we try to meet our own needs while we communicate with them, then we can be able to solve our problems. Most people don't have a name for it, but when we're on MDMA, what we naturally start to use as a byproduct... Put this on. All right, now I can be the high priest of MDMA. So, nonviolent communication is what we do automatically when we're on the MDMA experience. So if it's a tool, we think about it logically, or if we think about it cognitively, and we realize that when we try to meet people's unmet needs and try to connect with people, that's how we solve disputes. That's how we resolve problems. And just a brief example of how that works on a practical level: if a father has a child and asks that child to take the garbage out at this time of the day, every day, well, what that father is doing is trying to make a demand on that child. What happens when we make demands of people to do anything? When we make a demand, we remove the humanness from that person because we just look at them as an object of our desire. But if we look at that person as an emotional being who has needs, and if we realize that our own needs, that father in that instance can connect with his son and maybe make a mutual arrangement for taking the trash out. Maybe the father can help, but that's how we solve problems. And this, in my belief, we can. All right, well, the hand of God has now touched me, so we have to finish with. Yes, nonviolent communication can be used to solve problems, and this is how relational anarchism works on a grand scale and how we can solve problems on society at large, and also we can use Derrick's freedom cells and friendship circles to build the kind of communities we want.
Yeah! Give it for Sterlin Mohan, guys. Thank you. If you want to follow his work, check out psychologic-anarchist.com or on Facebook page, Psychologic Anarchist, and he's working on his book for Relational Anarchism, which will be coming out hopefully in the next year or so. Thank you, Sterlin. Come talk to this man. We got such marvelous monsters up now. Thank you guys for being here. For the Community 13, live free! 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 Thank you guys.